You're watching Free Speech TV.
From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now! We're on the road at Stanford University in California.
I have ordered the Secretaries of Interior and Homeland Security, as well as Administrator Lisa Jackson of the Environmental Protection Agency, to visit the site on Friday to ensure that BP and the entire U.S. government is doing everything possible, not just to respond to this incident, but also to determine its cause.
The massive BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico has reached the Louisiana coastline. 5,000 barrels of oil a day continue to spew into the water. Then we go to Mexico for the latest in the attack on an international humanitarian convoy by a paramilitary group in the southern state of Oaxaca that left 2 people dead. And we remember civil rights leader Dorothy Height.
One of the things that we have learned is that we may have come to this country by different ships, but we're all in the same boat now, and that we have to learn how we work together.
President Obama, the First Lady, and hundreds of mourners attend Height's funeral at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. We'll speak with Stanford professor Claiborne Carson. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The massive BP oil well leak in the Gulf of Mexico has reached the Louisiana coastline as fears grow of a worse disaster than the 1989 Exxon Valdez oil spill. 5,000 barrels of oil a day continue to spew into the water beneath the site of the Deepwater Horizon rig that exploded and sank last week. At the White House, President Obama said BP is ultimately responsible for funding the response and cleanup operations, but vowed to increase federal involvement.
I've been receiving frequent briefings from members of my cabinet and White House staff, including an update last night on the additional breach and another update this morning. And while BP is ultimately responsible for funding the cost of response and cleanup operations, my administration will continue to use every single available resource at our disposal, including potentially the Department of Defense, to address the incident.
We'll have more on the BP oil spill later in the broadcast. Thousands of people turned out for a protest on Wall Street Thursday to denounce the taxpayer-funded bailout and the role of large financial firms in the nation's economic crisis. A coalition of union and community groups organized the march as the Senate opened debate on a measure to overhaul financial regulation.
We want to send a clear message to them. Which side are you on? Are you going to side with Wall Street and the bankers, the same bankers that got us in this mess? Or are you going to do what we would think would be the obvious thing and side with the American people?
Before the march, dozens of protesters crowded the lobbies of buildings housing J.P. Morgan Chase, as well as Wells Fargo and Wachovia. We'll have more on the Wall Street protest after headlines. Federal prosecutors have reportedly opened a criminal investigation into the Wall Street giant Goldman Sachs. The firm is under scrutiny for marketing mortgage securities to clients while simultaneously betting these securities would fail. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan is said to be carrying out the probe. The Securities and Exchange Commission filed a civil suit against Goldman this month and is said to have referred its case to federal prosecutors. Opposition to Arizona's new immigration laws growing, with ongoing protests and the first federal lawsuit seeking its reversal. The law forces police officers to determine the immigration status of anyone they suspect of being an undocumented immigrant. Opponents call it the harshest anti-immigrant measure in the country and a license for racial profiling. On Thursday, hundreds of people rallied against the law to protest outside the state capitol in Phoenix. The demonstrators included the veteran labor activist Dolores Huerta and the pop musician Shakira. Dolores Huerta said the law is galvanizing the immigrant rights movement.
This is an opportunity for all of us here that we're going to get engaged, and we are going to change the politics of the state of Arizona. We cannot let this state continue to be the black sheep of all of the states in the United States of America that continues to pass these laws that are racist.
Another protest was held in Chicago, where dozens of people rallied outside a Major League Baseball game featuring the visiting Arizona Diamondbacks. A small plane displaying a banner criticizing the immigration laws circled above the stadium. Back in Arizona, 15-year Tucson police veteran Martin Escobar filed suit against the law, saying it would impede investigations and violate constitutional rights. Escobar's suit was followed by a separate challenge from the National Coalition of Latino clergy and Christian leaders. The group is seeking an injunction preventing the law's enforcement. Thomas Sands of the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Educational Fund said his group will also file suit.
A lawsuit will be filed in federal court sometime to ensure that the law will never be implemented. So based upon what the implementation date ends up being, 90 days from when the legislative session closes, we will go into court, we will file a complaint, and we'll be seeking to enjoin and prevent the law from ever being implemented.
The sheriff for Arizona's Pima County, meanwhile, has announced he'll refuse to enforce the new law. Sheriff Clarence Dupnick called the law, quote, disgusting, racist, and stupid. A new Pentagon report says violence in Afghanistan is up nearly 90% from this time last year. Road sign bomb attacks were up 240% over the same period. Support for Afghan insurgents increased from 33 Afghan districts to 48 as of last month. The U.S.-led NATO force, meanwhile, has killed the relative of an Afghan lawmaker in an overnight raid. The lawmaker, Safia Siddiqui, says soldiers broke into her home in the middle of the night without warning. The victim was carrying a gun, thinking the intruders were thieves. France, meanwhile, has admitted to killing 4 Afghan civilians in an attack earlier this month. The French military says the victims were accidentally killed when its forces fired missiles at Afghan militants. In other news from Afghanistan, the United Nations has closed its mission in Kandahar ahead of a major U.S.-led offensive there. The NATO force is expected to launch its largest attack of the nearly 9-year war around Kandahar in the coming months. At Guantanamo, a Canadian prisoner boycotted his evidentiary hearing on Thursday after refusing to wear blacked-out goggles and sound-deafening earmuffs while transported from his cell. The hearing's being held to weight Omar Khadr's claims that he was tortured into falsely confessing to killing a U.S. soldier in Afghanistan. Khadr was 15 years old when U.S. troops imprisoned him in 2002. He says U.S. military guards beat him and threatened him with rape after he arrived at Guantanamo that same year. Defense attorney Barry Coburn said Khadr is still being mistreated.
We are just extremely, extremely concerned about what Mr. Khadr is suffering through right now. I think it was probably obvious to everyone in the courtroom that he appeared to be in extreme pain, and I think even was crying at one point. So, I mean, the notion of putting kind of tight, blacked-out goggles on a person in this sort of physical condition is something, without necessarily putting a particular label on it, is something that I find extremely difficult to understand.
Khadr later attended the afternoon session where he occasionally broke into tears. He's set to be tried later this year in the first military tribunal of the Obama White House. Back in the United States, the House has approved a measure that would allow a referendum on Puerto Rico's political future. The proposal would allow for a 2-step vote in which Puerto Ricans would first vote on whether they wish to maintain the island's current status as a U.S. Commonwealth or change direction. If the latter choice prevails, Puerto Rico could then hold a second vote, presenting 4 options: statehood, independence, the current status, or sovereignty linked to the United States. The measure now goes to the Senate. And 4 prisoners convicted in last year's controversial Holy Land Foundation terror trial have been moved to secretive prison units known as Communication Management Units, or CMUs. The units are designed to severely restrict communication with family members, the media, and the outside world. The 4 were convicted on charges of supporting the Palestinian group Hamas through the Holy Land Foundation, once the nation's largest Muslim charity. They were never accused of supporting violence and were convicted for funding charities that aided needy Palestinians. The U.S. State Department had also funded the same groups. The government's case relied on Israeli intelligence as well as disputed documents and electronic surveillance gathered by the FBI over a span of 15 years. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. We're on the road at Stanford University in California. I'm Amy Goodman. Well, in New York, thousands of workers and union leaders marched on Wall Street Thursday to express their outrage over the recession, predatory lending practices, and the federal response to the crisis. Independent journalist Brandon Jordan was on the scene and filed this report for Democracy Now!